I used to think that no matter what, a man's hard work would always be appreciated at home. That was before I married Sophia, a woman who, despite standing beside me as my wife, had never truly seen me as her equal. For the longest time, I let things slide. Maybe it was love, maybe it was just the fear of confrontation, or maybe I was simply too exhausted after a full day at work to deal with her dismissiveness. But now, as I sit here, looking at the life I built, the one she keeps acting like I owe her, I realize something. I was never a husband in her eyes, just a provider, just a convenience. And the worst part? She thought I could never walk away. I met Sophia when I was still working my way up at the supermarket. Back then, I was just another floor worker, stacking shelves and hoping to move into a management position. She was polite, charming even, at least on the surface. She liked the fact that I was ambitious, said she admired my work ethic. At least, that's what I thought at the time. It didn't take long for me to realize that her so-called admiration was conditional. She liked ambition in theory, but in practice, she expected me to already be at the finish line. For the first year of our marriage, we didn't have much. We were renting a tiny apartment while I worked long shifts, coming home drained but hopeful that all my efforts would pay off. She was working part-time at her uncle's company, a job she got through family connections, and even though she barely put in 20 hours a week, she spoke about it like she was running a Fortune 500 company. I didn't mind at first. In fact, I encouraged her to be proud of her work. But it didn't take long before the dynamic started shifting. She started talking down to me in small ways. It wasn't obvious at first. A joke here, a casual comment there. Must be nice to come home and just relax, she'd say, right as I was kicking off my work boots. I have to juggle work and house duties. You have it easy. I was confused. Did she think my job was a joke? Did she think I was just standing around all day, twiddling my thumbs? But I swallowed it, assuming she was just tired. I mean, marriage isn't perfect, right? You don't pick fights over little things. Then the kids came. First our son, then our daughter a year later. I remember feeling like everything was falling into place. I was building a future for them, working overtime when I could, putting aside savings, trying to make sure we never struggled. But for Sophia, the kids only seemed to reinforce what she already believed, that she was the backbone of the family, and I was just lucky to be included. She never outright said it, but her actions spoke louder than any words. She controlled everything. Where we lived, how we spent money, what furniture we bought, where the kids went for daycare. Every decision had to go through her approval. And when I tried to give input, Daniel, you don't understand these things. Just let me handle it. At first, I convinced myself it was just her way of being efficient, but then I realized something. She didn't just make decisions. She made all the decisions, and my role was simply to fund them. She never consulted me, never considered my opinions valid. And the worst part? She made sure I knew it. You should be grateful, she'd say whenever I questioned her choices. If it weren't for my planning, you'd still be living in some tiny apartment, clueless about how to raise a family. She spoke like she was single-handedly running the household, like my income wasn't keeping everything afloat. And what made it worse was how she spoke about money. Sophia's uncle was well off, and she had grown up in relative comfort. She never truly struggled, so she didn't respect what it meant to build something from the ground up. She'd roll her eyes whenever I mentioned finances, acting as if money was just some abstract concept that would always be there. Daniel, stop worrying about money. It's embarrassing. We'll always be fine. But by we, she meant herself. She always had a safety net. Her uncle, her parents, their financial connections. If things ever got hard, she had people to run to. But me? I had no such luxury. Everything I had, I worked for. And that's why she never took me seriously. She assumed that if we ever divorced, I'd be ruined. She saw herself as the foundation of my life, the person I depended on to keep things together. She genuinely believed I couldn't afford to leave her. I wonder if she realizes how wrong she is. Then came the promotion. After years of grinding at that supermarket, I was made supervisor. It wasn't just a title, it was validation. Proof that my work meant something, that I was progressing. I came home that night actually excited for the first time in a long time, expecting maybe, just maybe, she'd be proud of me. But as I walked through the door, I saw it. That look on her face. The condescending smirk. Well, looks like my husband finally has something to celebrate, she said, like she was talking to a child who just learned how to tie his shoes. That was the moment I realized it. She didn't respect me. She never had. But what she didn't realize, I was done looking for her approval. And soon, she was going to find out exactly what that meant. I always thought that when a man worked hard for his family, there would be a sense of mutual appreciation. A simple understanding that both partners played their roles in making life function. That was before I sat across from Sophia at the dinner table, staring at the condescending smirk on her face, realizing, once and for all, that she never saw me as an equal. That night, I walked in expecting something different. My promotion to supervisor had just been officially announced, something I had worked years for. I wasn't expecting a parade or a trophy, but I thought there would be a little respect, maybe even a small moment of pride in her eyes. Instead, she greeted me with barely veiled amusement, as if my accomplishment was nothing more than a trivial footnote in her world. Well, looks like my husband finally has something to celebrate, she had said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. It stung more than it should have. I wasn't looking for her validation, not anymore. But I couldn't ignore the way she looked down at me, the way she spoke to me like a child who had just gotten a gold star on his homework. And then, the real moment came. I sat down at the table, expecting to enjoy a meal with my family, to unwind and soak in the moment. Sophia had gone out of her way to buy premium meat, something she usually wouldn't bother with, and for a split second, I thought, maybe she actually put in some effort for me this time. But as soon as I picked up my fork, she leaned back in her chair and let out a dramatic sigh. I guess this is the best celebration you can afford, huh? Silence. The words hung in the air like a grenade, and I felt something inside me snap. I put my fork down carefully, my appetite vanishing instantly. The kids, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing at the table, continued eating, their small hands reaching for bites of food. But my eyes were locked on Sophia, who, for the first time, looked at me with a glimmer of hesitation. What did you just say? My voice was calm, too calm. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, relax, Daniel. I'm just saying, you should be proud of yourself. Not everyone can climb up to a supervisor position, you know? That same smirk again. That fake encouragement, coated in passive-aggressive venom. But I wasn't in the mood to play along. You really think I can't do better than this, don't you? Her smirk faltered. Daniel, why are you being so sensitive? I was just making conversation. She was lying. I could hear it in her tone, see it in the way her eyes darted to the side as she picked up her glass of water. She wasn't making conversation. She was reminding me of my place. And for years, I had let her. But not tonight. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table. You don't respect me, do you? Her brow furrowed. What kind of question is that? A real one. She scoffed. Daniel, if I didn't respect you, why would I be sitting here eating this meal with you? Why would I be taking care of our home, raising our kids, making sure everything runs smoothly while I what? I cut her off. Her eyes flashed. While you go to work and do whatever it is you do all day. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. So that's what you think? That I just waste time at work? She shrugged, taking a bite of her food. I mean, come on, Daniel. You're just a supervisor at a supermarket. It's not like you're running a major company. Let's not pretend you're some CEO, okay? And there it was. The truth behind all the little jabs, the dismissive comments, the patronizing smiles. She didn't just look down on me. She had never even considered me worthy of being on the same level as her. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I kept my composure. I glanced at our son, who was staring at me with wide, curious eyes, then at our daughter, who had started fidgeting uncomfortably at the change in mood. I refused to fight in front of them. So instead, I picked up my knife and fork and took another bite, pretending like nothing had happened. Sophia, mistaking my silence for submission, smirked again and reached for her glass. I mean, it's not like I'm trying to put you down or anything. But, Daniel, let's be realistic. I handle most of the important decisions in this house. I manage our finances. I make sure the kids are taken care of. What do you do, exactly, other than bring home a paycheck? I set my silverware down. Slowly, deliberately. I stood up, adjusting my chair as I pushed it back. I worked hard for this promotion, I said, keeping my voice measured. I put in years of effort, staying late, covering extra shifts, dealing with nonsense so that this family could have stability. And instead of celebrating with me, instead of even pretending to be happy for me, you sit here and mock me. Sophia rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Daniel, stop being dramatic. I clenched my jaw, shoving my hands into my pockets to keep from slamming my fist on the table. No, you stop, I said, my voice lower. Stop pretending like you've ever respected me. Stop acting like I need you to survive. You think I can't make it on my own? That I need your approval to exist? You couldn't be more wrong, Sophia. For the first time in our marriage, she looked uncertain. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if trying to decide whether to argue or laugh it off. And then, she made the biggest mistake of her life. She stood up, walked over to the counter, opened a drawer, and pulled out a signed divorce paper. She waved it in my face, her smirk returning. Fine, Daniel. If you're so upset, go ahead. Submit it. Let's see how well you do on your own. She was daring me. She thought I wouldn't do it. She thought I would beg to stay. So I took the paper from her hand, folded it neatly, and grabbed my coat. Her smirk vanished instantly. Where are you going? She asked, her voice suddenly less amused. I walked to the door, calm and certain. To submit this, I said, since you're so eager to see what I can do without you. And then, I walked out, without looking back. I don't think Sophia expected me to actually leave. She stood there, frozen, still holding the divorce papers she had smugly waved in my face just moments before. The look in her eyes flickered from amusement to mild confusion, and then, just for a second, panic. I didn't stop to enjoy it. I grabbed my coat, folded the papers neatly, and walked straight out the door. I could hear her footsteps behind me, quick and hesitant, like she was trying to decide whether to stop me or let me go, assuming I'd turn back on my own. But I didn't. I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and headed straight to the county clerk's office. It's funny. You'd think a moment like this would be filled with emotion, that I'd be shaking with adrenaline or second-guessing myself, but all I felt was clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't being weighed down by her voice in the back of my mind, telling me what I could and couldn't do. I wasn't being mocked for my job. I wasn't being treated like I was less than. I was just free. The drive to the county clerk's office was only 10 minutes, but with every mile, I could feel the last decade of my life unraveling in the rearview mirror. The first time she dismissed my career as just a supermarket job. The countless times she rolled her eyes when I spoke about work. The way she constantly made it seem like I was just an accessory to her life. And now, she was about to find out exactly what it felt like to be without me. The county clerk's office was quiet when I walked in. A woman at the front desk barely glanced up before gesturing to a small window labeled Filing and Records. I approached it, setting the divorce papers down with a sense of finality I hadn't expected. A clerk, a tired-looking man in his 50s, took them, flipping through the pages with a bored expression. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked without looking up. I almost laughed. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. He nodded, pulled out a stamp, and pressed it down onto the paper with a satisfying thud. "Filed," he said. And just like that, I was done. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders back, and walked out of the building. As soon as I stepped into the parking lot, my phone started buzzing. Sophia. I ignored the first call, and the second. By the time the third came through, I smirked and finally answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then, "Did you actually submit it?" Her voice was different now. No arrogance. No smug amusement. Just disbelief. I opened my car door and slid inside, resting my elbow on the steering wheel. "Of course I did," I said, my tone casual. "You gave me the papers yourself, didn't you?" Silence. Then, Daniel, I wasn't. I didn't think you'd actually." "What?" I cut her off. "You thought I'd beg you to take me back?" Another beat of silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath, like she was finally realizing that she had played herself. Daniel, just come home so we can talk about this. Talk. Now she wanted to talk? I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, I think we're past that. She huffed. You're being irrational. Irrational? I repeated, shaking my head. You shoved a divorce paper in my face, dared me to submit it, and now that I actually did, you want to call me irrational? That's not what I... You thought I couldn't afford to leave you, I interrupted. You thought I needed you, that I'd crawl back, that I'd be too scared to walk away. I paused, letting the truth settle between us before delivering the final blow. You were wrong. She inhaled sharply. Daniel, But I wasn't interested in hearing whatever backpedaling excuse she had prepared. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't go home that night. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I drove to my brother's house, a place I hadn't visited nearly as much as I should have over the years because of Sophia's constant disapproval. I knocked on the door, and when he answered, I just held up the divorce papers. He glanced at them, then back at me, and a slow smirk spread across his face. Took you long enough, he said. I laughed. Really laughed for the first time in years. I know, I admitted, stepping inside. The next morning, I went straight to work. I half expected Sophia to show up at the store, causing a scene in the break room, but she didn't. Instead, I got a text. Come home so we can figure things out. Figure things out? The time for figuring things out was years ago. I ignored it. Instead, I walked into the supermarket, greeted my team, and got to work. A supervisor, a man who had built his own future. And Sophia? She'd soon realize that for the first time in our marriage, she wasn't the one holding the power. I was. And I was never looking back. I never thought silence could be so satisfying. For years, my house had been filled with Sophia's voice, telling me what I could and couldn't do, downplaying my efforts, controlling every aspect of our lives as if I was just another one of her household accessories rather than her husband. But now, she was silent. No smug remarks. No dismissive sighs. No condescending looks. Just silence. She had thought she was untouchable, so sure that I wouldn't submit the divorce papers, that I wouldn't dare leave her. And now? She was scrambling, desperately trying to fix what she had broken. But it was too late. The morning after I filed for divorce, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in years, light. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. No more walking on eggshells. No more being treated like I wasn't enough. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. I got dressed, ate breakfast in peace, and headed to work. Something I used to dread going to because I knew I'd come home to more of Sophia's nagging. But today was different. I walked into the supermarket, greeted my team, and for the first time since my promotion, I actually felt like a supervisor. Because now, I wasn't going home to a woman who belittled me. I was going home to freedom. Sophia, on the other hand, she was falling apart. The first sign of her unraveling came that afternoon when she showed up at my workplace. I was in the break room, finishing up some reports when one of the cashiers poked their head in. Hey, Daniel, your wife's here. I looked up, brow furrowing. Ex-wife. Yeah, well, she's waiting outside. Looks like she wants to talk. Of course, she did. I sighed, pushing my chair back. I already knew what was coming. When I stepped outside, I found her standing near the entrance, arms crossed, trying to keep up the same arrogant front she always had. But I could see it in her eyes, the panic, the uncertainty. She never thought it would get this far. You're ignoring my calls, she said, her voice clipped. I shrugged. I don't owe you an explanation. She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. So that's it? You file for divorce and suddenly, you're too good to talk to me? I tilted my head. Funny. You didn't want to talk when you were waving the divorce papers in my face. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't used to this, wasn't used to me standing my ground. Daniel, let's be reasonable, she started, her voice suddenly softer. We have a life together. Kids. A home. This isn't something you just throw away. I laughed. Actually laughed. Sophia, Don't pretend like you cared about our life together. You treated me like I was nothing. You didn't respect me. You didn't value me. And now that I've left, suddenly, you're acting like we were some perfect couple." She flushed, looking away. "That's not. You never thought I could leave," I continued, stepping closer. "You assumed I'd always be there, always tolerating your insults, your arrogance, your need to be in control of everything. But I don't have to tolerate it anymore. I'm done." She stared at me, lips parted, as if she couldn't believe the words were actually coming out of my mouth. "You're really going through with this," she whispered. "I already did," I reminded her. Her face twisted in frustration. "Do you even know what you're doing? How are you going to manage on your own? How are you going to afford?" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You think I can't take care of myself?" I asked, shaking my head. "I've been the one taking care of this family for years. I've been the one keeping everything running while you sat back and acted like you were doing me a favor by just existing. You need me, Sophia, not the other way around." She blinked, taking a step back, like the realization was finally sinking in. "You'll regret this," she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. I smirked. "No, I won't. But you? You already do." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back inside, leaving her standing there, speechless. Over the next few weeks, things became clearer than ever. Sophia wasn't the strong, independent woman she always claimed to be. She was panicking. She started calling my family, trying to get them to talk some sense into me. They ignored her. She tried to guilt-trip our kids, asking them if they wanted Daddy to leave. Our 4-year-old son looked her dead in the eye and said, "Daddy's happy now." She lost it. She showed up at my new apartment crying, saying she had made a mistake. She begged me to come back. I didn't. Instead, I looked at her and said the same thing she once said to me. "You should be grateful. If it weren't for me, you'd still be living in that tiny apartment, clueless about how to raise a family." Her face drained of color, and in that moment, she knew. She had lost me. For good. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My job performance skyrocketed. Without her constant negativity weighing me down, I was excelling. My boss even hinted at another promotion. I got my own place. A nice apartment, not fancy, but peaceful. My space. I spent time with my kids, quality time, where I wasn't exhausted from fighting battles at home. I started dating again, and this time, I wasn't looking for validation. I was looking for someone who actually respected me. Sophia had assumed she was the reason I was stable, that without her, I'd crumble. But now, she was the one struggling. And me? I was better than ever. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could always talk down to me, belittle me, and keep me under her thumb. She had thought I'd never have the courage to leave. She had thought I couldn't afford to be on my own. But the moment I walked out of that house, the moment I submitted those divorce papers, the tables turned. She didn't realize it then. But now, she did. And it was glorious. I always heard that people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. Sophia? She never thought she'd lose me. She assumed she'd always have the upper hand. That no matter what she said, how she dismissed my efforts, or how often she looked down on me, I'd always stay. Because, in her mind, I needed her. And now, she was scrambling to pick up the pieces of the life she thought she controlled. But here's the thing. It was never hers to control in the first place. It didn't take long for her fantasy of being the independent, irreplaceable wife to shatter. At first, she kept up the act. When people asked about our divorce, she spun the story in her favor, telling anyone who would listen that I was the one who overreacted. Daniel got a little carried away with his pride, she'd say with a fake sigh, as if she was some tragic victim. He couldn't handle a strong woman like me. The arrogance in her voice was almost laughable. But here's the thing about lying to yourself. It only works until reality catches up. The first real crack in her delusion came when the bills started stacking up. She had always treated money like it magically replenished itself. Never mind that it was my paycheck keeping our family afloat. When I left, she still had her job at her uncle's company, but her hours were part-time. She had never been responsible for handling finances, and now, she was in way over her head. She called me one evening, her voice sweet in a way it hadn't been in years. "Hey, Daniel. I was thinking, maybe we should sit down and talk. You know, for the kids." "For the kids." "Right." I let out a short laugh. I knew exactly what she wanted. She wasn't calling out of concern for our children. She was struggling, and she thought I'd come back to fix it. "We already talked, Sophia," I said flatly. "We signed the divorce papers, remember?" Silence. Then she cleared her throat. "Well, I just thought, maybe we rushed things. Maybe we should reconsider, for our family's sake." I almost admired her attempt to sound reasonable, if I hadn't seen right through it. "Our family?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "You mean the same family you thought you were running all by yourself?" She huffed. "Daniel, don't be petty." "Petty? That's funny, coming from you." I could hear her frustration through the phone, the cracks in her confidence getting wider. "Fine," she snapped, dropping the fake sweetness. "I need help with the bills. Are you happy now?" There it was. She didn't want me. She wanted my money. You see, she thought I'd be the one suffering without her. She thought I'd be the one who'd fall apart, struggling to keep up with everything. But in reality, she was drowning. She started missing payments, on the rent, on daycare, on the utilities. The same house she once bragged about being the perfect home suddenly wasn't so perfect anymore when she was the one managing it. I found out from our old landlord, who, by the way, had never had an issue with late payments until she was the only one responsible. "Daniel, I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay with Sophia? She's been late on rent 2 months in a row." I just smirked. Of course, she was. Because Sophia didn't know how to survive without me. And it wasn't just the finances. Her carefully curated image of being the strong, capable woman started crumbling. She used to walk into daycare pickups with an air of superiority, acting like she had everything under control. Now, she looked frazzled, exhausted, and barely keeping it together. A mutual friend of ours, one of the few who hadn't bought into her narrative, texted me one day. "Man, I don't know if you care, but I saw Sophia today. She looks like she's barely sleeping." "That's too bad," I replied, without a shred of sympathy. This was the same woman who used to make me feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't good enough. Now, she was learning, the hard way, that maybe, just maybe, she was the one who had underestimated me. The final nail in the coffin came when she found out I was doing better without her. I had moved into a new apartment, nothing extravagant, but comfortable and mine. My job performance improved so much that my boss pulled me aside and said, "I don't know what's changed, but keep it up. We're considering you for a higher management position." I spent more quality time with my kids than I ever had before, without the stress of Sophia's constant negativity looming over me. And then, she saw me with someone else. It wasn't serious, not yet, but I had started seeing a woman who actually respected me, who didn't treat me like a walking paycheck or an inconvenience. Sophia? She lost it. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, knocking aggressively at my door. When I opened it, she immediately shoved past me. "You're already dating someone?" she demanded, eyes blazing. I crossed my arms, unfazed. "Why do you care?" "Because we were a family, Daniel." I laughed. Actually laughed. "A family? You spent years making sure I knew you didn't need me, and now, suddenly, you want to act like we were some perfect household?" She flushed with anger. "I made one mistake." "One?" I raised an eyebrow. "You spent our entire marriage making me feel like I wasn't good enough. You treated me like a backup plan. And now, because I'm finally moving on, you want to act like you suddenly care?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because she knew I was right. She had built a world where she was the queen, where I was nothing more than a servant to her comfort. And now, that world was falling apart. I stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "You can leave now, Sophia." She hesitated, as if realizing, for the first time, that she had truly lost me. Then, with a final huff, she stormed out. As the door closed behind her, I took a deep breath, calm, content. She had thought I'd be the one regretting everything. But in the end, she was the one suffering the consequences of her own arrogance. Sophia thought she had it all figured out. For years, she carried herself like she was better than me, like she was the one holding everything together. She made it seem as if I was lucky to have her, not the other way around. But now? Now she was failing. Now she was alone. Now she was desperate. And the best part? It was all her own doing. It didn't take long for Sophia to realize that life without me wasn't as easy as she imagined. She had mocked my job, belittled my career, and dismissed my hard work like it was insignificant. But when I was gone, so was the financial stability she took for granted. The bills that used to be paid without a second thought started stacking up on the kitchen counter. The daycare she once bragged about affording so easily, now she was scrambling to keep up with the payments. The comfortable home she was so proud to live in, now she was struggling to maintain it alone. And me? I was thriving. It didn't take long before she started reaching out again. At first, it was subtle. A casual text. Hey, just checking in. How are the kids? I didn't respond, because I knew what she was doing. She wasn't texting me because she suddenly cared about my well-being. She was texting because she was testing the waters, trying to see if there was a way back. But there wasn't. The texts became calls. The calls became voicemails. Daniel, we need to talk. Look, I know things got messy, but we can work this out. You're making a mistake. We belong together. I deleted every single one. Because here's the thing. She had her chance. She had years to treat me with respect, years to value me, years to show appreciation, and she wasted them all. So now, she had to live with the consequences. The breaking point came when she finally showed up at my apartment. I had been expecting it. Sophia had too much pride to admit defeat over the phone. She needed to see me face to face, to try and manipulate her way back in. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. The woman who once carried herself with arrogance and superiority now looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair that was less put together than usual. A posture that lacked the confidence she always faked. She forced a smile, but I could tell she wasn't feeling nearly as smug as she used to. Daniel, she said, her voice softer than usual. I crossed my arms. Sophia. She hesitated, like she was trying to figure out the best approach. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to invite her in. We are talking. Her jaw tensed. She wasn't used to me being this cold, this unbothered. She took a slow breath. Look, I think we made a mistake. I raised an eyebrow. We. She swallowed. You and I. This divorce, it was rushed. We had a good life together. We can fix this. I almost laughed. Fix this? I repeated. Sophia, there's nothing to fix. You made it clear how little you respected me. You treated me like I was beneath you. And now that you're struggling, you suddenly want to fix things? She flinched, but I wasn't done. Let me guess, money's getting tight? You're realizing that life on your own isn't as easy as you thought? Her face turned red. That's not. Be honest, I interrupted. You don't miss me. You miss the convenience of me. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because she knew I was right. For the first time in our marriage, she had to face the truth. She wasn't as strong as she pretended to be, and without me, she was falling apart. I sighed, stepping back. Go home, Sophia. Her eyes widened. Daniel, please. This conversation is over, I said firmly. Her breathing hitched, like she was trying to hold back frustration, or maybe even tears. You'll regret this, she snapped, grasping at whatever power she thought she had left. I smirked. No, I won't. And with that, I closed the door in her face. That was the last time she tried. Maybe she finally understood that I was serious, that I wasn't coming back, that the power she once held over me was gone. And me? I moved on. I got promoted. I built a better life. I surrounded myself with people who actually valued me, while she was stuck in the mess she created. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself. Sophia always thought she was untouchable. She lived in this self-created fantasy, where she was always in control, always the one with the upper hand, always the one calling the shots. She convinced herself that I depended on her, that she was the glue holding everything together, that I could never function without her presence in my life. But now She was learning the truth the hard way. She was the one who needed me, and she had already lost me for good. I expected Sophia to try and come back. I knew she would, but I never expected her to fall apart this fast. The first sign of her downfall came when I heard from a mutual friend, someone who had been neutral during our divorce but had no problem keeping me updated on Sophia's situation. "You won't believe this, man," he chuckled over the phone. "Sophia is completely losing it. She's been bouncing checks left and right. The landlord is this close to kicking her out." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because this was the same woman who mocked my salary, dismissed my efforts, and acted like she was the only one capable of running a household. Now, she couldn't even keep up with the rent. Her financial struggles were only the beginning. The cracks in her perfectly constructed image became wider as she started slipping up at work. She had always prided herself on being the competent one, the one who was so put together, the one who had everything under control. But now, she was showing up late. She was forgetting important deadlines. She was missing meetings and making rookie mistakes. And her uncle? The same man who had given her a job out of family loyalty? He was losing patience. Another text from my friend. "Sophia had a breakdown at work today. Her uncle pulled her aside, told her to get her act together or he's cutting her hours even more." I shook my head. She was watching her world fall apart, and she had no idea how to stop it. Then came the final blow. I was at work when I got a call from her landlord. At first, I thought it was a mistake. "Hello, is this Daniel?" "Yes, who's this?" "This is Mr. Carmichael. I'm Sophia's landlord. I wasn't sure if I should call, but she listed you as an emergency contact. I thought you should know. She's facing eviction." I let out a slow breath. So that's where she was now, reduced to calling me for help, despite all the ways she treated me. "I'm not responsible for her," I said, my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "I figured you might say that," he admitted. "But she doesn't have anyone else?" I almost laughed. The woman who once acted like she didn't need me, like I was beneath her, now had no one else to turn to. Later that night, I got the inevitable call. Sophia's name flashed across my screen. I considered ignoring it. But then I thought, no, I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to hear the desperation in her voice. So I answered. "Daniel," she breathed. As if relieved, I picked up, "Sophia." There was a long pause. Then, finally, "I need help." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang between us. "Oh," I said, feigning innocence. "You? The woman who didn't need me? The woman who was so much better than me? You need help?" "Daniel, please," she sighed, her voice weary in a way I had never heard before. She sounded defeated, tired, lost. "I know I was wrong, okay? I should have treated you better. I should have appreciated what we had. But I don't know. I thought, She trailed off, as if she couldn't even find the words to justify herself. For the first time in her life, she had no excuses, no rationalizations, no false sense of superiority. She was just a woman who had finally realized she had thrown away the best thing in her life. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't do this alone." I took a slow breath. I could have told her I didn't care. I could have told her to figure it out on her own. I could have laughed in her face the way she had laughed at me for years. But instead, I said something that cut deeper. "You should have thought about that before you pushed me away." Silence. Then, "Please, Daniel, can we talk?" I didn't hesitate. "No." Then, I hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone, waiting to see if she'd call back. She didn't. She knew there was nothing left to say. For years, Sophia thought she had all the power in our marriage. She thought she could walk all over me, belittle me, and still expect me to be there. She thought she was the one who kept our family together, the one who could live without me. But now she knew the truth. Now she knew that I wasn't the one who needed her. She was the one who needed me, and she let me go. For the first time in my life, I felt no resentment, no anger, just satisfaction. Because while she was facing the consequences of her own arrogance, I was moving forward. And Sophia? She was left with nothing but regret. Regret is a funny thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor as the sun sets. It starts as a nagging thought, a whisper in the back of your mind. Maybe I should have done things differently. Then, as reality settles in, that whisper turns into a scream. For Sophia, she was drowning in regret. And the best part? It was all her own doing. She had once been so sure of herself, so convinced that she was too good for me, that I was the one who needed her. She treated me like a disposable afterthought, like I was lucky just to be in her presence. She thought she could control me. She thought I would never leave. But now, she was alone. And from what I heard, she was finally realizing what that meant. A mutual friend, one of the few people who had stayed neutral during our divorce, called me up one afternoon. "Man, you won't believe what I just saw," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "What?" "Sophia. Sitting outside that little cafe on 5th Street, alone, just staring at her phone like she was expecting someone to show up. Maybe she was waiting for someone?" I offered. "Nah," he said. I watched her for almost 20 minutes. She kept checking her phone, but no one came. She just looked lost. I exhaled through my nose. Lost. That was exactly the word I would use to describe her now. She had built her identity around being in control. Now, with no one left to control, she was adrift. A week later, I ran into someone from her old job. Apparently, she had finally pushed things too far. They cut her hours again, the guy told me. Her uncle gave her so many chances, but she kept messing up. She's barely working part-time now. I wasn't surprised. Sophia had never been good at handling stress. She had never had to deal with real consequences. And now that they were finally catching up to her, she was crumbling under the weight. I could only imagine how that felt for her. To go from being the woman who thought she was untouchable to someone who couldn't even hold onto her job. But the truth? I didn't care. She had made this bed, and now she had to lie in it. The final confirmation that her regret was consuming her came one evening when I got a message I never expected. It was from her number. For months, she had tried to reach out. I ignored her calls. I deleted her texts. But this time, I opened it. A single sentence. "I miss you." I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even satisfaction. Just nothing. I knew what this was. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of her life that existed when I was in it. She missed the security, the stability, the feeling of being wanted. But she never wanted me. She wanted control. And now that she had none, she was trying to reach for the one thing she thought she could get back. She thought she could undo it. But life doesn't work like that. I locked my phone and never responded. Regret is a funny thing. It doesn't let go easily. It lingers. It eats away at you. It follows you into the quiet moments when you have nowhere left to run. Sophia was living in that regret now. She had finally realized that she wasn't better than me. She had finally realized that she needed me more than I ever needed her. And now, she had to live with that truth. Every single day. Alone.